What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Tomatoito Boxing Show. And let's talk about a fight that may not have gotten a lot of notoriety this past weekend, this past Saturday night. It was on ESPN, and it was none other than a heavy-handed super middleweight who's been making a lot of noise. And those of you that have been following the super middleweight division, you're going to be very familiar with this name. Those of you that have not followed the super middleweight division, aside from the big names like David Benavidez, Canelo Alvarez, of course, Caleb Plant, Jaime Munguia, if you're not familiar with everybody else, how they're starting to stack up in the division, trying to make a name for themselves, forget about the Edgar Berlanga name. This guy, aside with David Morrell, I see this guy as another big star for the super middleweight division, and his name is Christian Mbilli. Christian Mbilli, who is fighting out of France, a Cameroonian established in France, fights out of France, and he's representing the super middleweight division very, very well, making noise within this division with the way that he fights. He's a fan-friendly fighter who is undoubtedly a threat for any of the other super middleweights. If you don't know or haven't watched any of Christian Mbilli's fights, they're a fun time. They're a fun time to watch, to sit back and enjoy some decent boxing. He's a traditional fighter that basically every single one of his punches is fully loaded, looking to hurt his opponents with every single punch. Therefore, his stamina starts to take a hit later on in the middle rounds. But a Christian Mbilli with the Jaime Munguia would be an amazing fan favorite fight. Immediate hit. Christian Mbilli would destroy Edgar Berlanga. To me, I don't even know why people mention him. I used to be very high on Edgar Berlanga. I used to give him a lot of praise. He does have good amateur boxing, a good background as far as amateur boxing is concerned, and he is a good boxer in his own right. Mentally, he's not there. He is delusional. He thinks he's at a different level, and that he fights at a different level, that he belongs at the top echelon, and people have hyped him up so much, especially with hip-hop stars like Fat Joe and Puerto Rican stars, actors, Rosie Perez, everybody that goes out to these fights that he had out in New York. He's a New Yorican fighter, New York-based with Puerto Rican background. So he has a lot of hype locally where people go out and basically blow his ego up, making him feel like he's a lot better than he is. He had all the trajectory in the world when he was under the banner, fighting under the banner of Top Rank, and he was gaining notoriety and being marketed as the next big thing to come out of Puerto Rico by way of New York, the next big star to represent Puerto Rico, and a knockout artist. And he was amassing first-round knockouts en route to win or break the record for most knockouts in the first round. I think he did something incredible, like 15 first-round knockouts or something like that. Something impressive. But as the competition continued to get a little stiffer for him, he began to show his real colors. And he began to struggle a little bit, which is great for an up-and-coming fighter, because you start to see when the metal gets tested, you start to see how they handle adversity, how they overcome adversity, how they manage to overcome certain obstacles, and all by way of different styles. The durability, different fighters that have different durability, where he starts hitting them with everything that would have eliminated and had eliminated every one of his prior opponents. Well, by the time that he starts facing a little bit stiffer competition, and they're able to take his punches, that's when adversity would set in. And Edgar Berlanga began to show his real colors, to the point where he ends up trying to bite one of his prior opponents, in Angulo. Angulo, a very durable, battle-tested fighter who had fights with the likes of David Benavidez in his past. So once you start showing that, and then you start looking subpar in other fights, and then you overcome certain adversity, and you manage to still get the win, but you're not looking as elusive as you were, and it becomes a big mental factor, where it's visually a mental factor, and you're able to see it. You're able to see it in his face, the way he carries himself, how tough these fights are getting for him. But yet he feels that he's the deserving one to fight a Canelo Alvarez who's at a completely different level than him. He's not at the level of Canelo Alvarez. He's not at the level of David Benavidez. He's not at the level of Jaime Munguia or Caleb Plant. I would like to see Edgar Berlanga with Gabe Rosado, who I feel would give him an absolute tough test. A Gabe Rosado who is currently retired, but has said so on multiple occasions that he'd be willing to come out of retirement to face Edgar Berlanga, especially for like a Puerto Rican Day parade or a Puerto Rican festival type weekend out in New York. Christian Mbilli, who this episode's about, would demolish Edgar Berlanga in my opinion. He was in action against Mark Heffron out in Canada. The UK-based Mark Heffron stepped into the ring with a 30-3 record, 1 draw to his name, 24 knockouts to his credit. A solid opponent. Who had the draw and a subsequent loss to super middleweight challenger Denzel Bentley. Has a loss to Liam Williams. Had a loss to Jack Cullen. So his opposition level was decent for Mark Heffron and a good test for Christian Mbilli. He was supposed to be the stiffest test of his career, of young Christian Mbilli's career. Mbilli wrapped him up in 1 round. Those body punches, Christian Mbilli is a body snatcher. He's like an oversized pit bull. He fights very similar to Pitbull. He has that Tyson type attack where I'm not comparing him to Mike Tyson. I'm just saying stylistically, it looks very similar or resembles those attacks that Mike Tyson when he would cover in and get inside the pocket. Tight guard to the head, drops the chin, tightens up the torso, gets in on the inside, begins throwing punches to the body, and finishes his combinations up high. Throws overhand looping hooks that are damaging to the opponents, and then resumes his attack to the body. The way that he varies and mixes up his attack is a sight to see. This is the 3rd fight that I've been able to watch Christian Mbilli fight since I started paying attention to him. All 3 times I've been impressed. He gets rid of Mark Heffron in the first round with a nasty body shot where Mark Heffron's on all fours, just clamoring in pain, doesn't meet the count, gets counted out, and the fight ended. Before, I bet you if anybody went out to go get a drink, by the time they made it back, the fight was over. Christian Mbilli, easy work. Made easy work of Mark Heffron, improves to 27-0, gives a 4th loss to Mark Heffron. All 4 of Mark Heffron's losses have come by way of stoppage. For Christian Mbilli, he has 23 knockouts to his credit of his 27 victories, unblemished otherwise, 27 years old, and is starting to amass a really good resume for himself. Mark Heffron was a solid test. Rohan Murdoch was an amazing fan-friendly fight. If you didn't watch the Mark Heffron fight. The highlights is basically the entire fight. Go back and watch the Rohan Murdoch fight. That was on the undercard of Better BF Callum Smith. And what a hell of a fight that was. They hit each other with everything. And Murdoch, the Australian fighter, Rohan Murdoch, hit Mbilli with some nasty shots where he was hurting Mbilli. He had him shaken up numerous times. And Mbilli just kept hunting forward, coming at him, and dropping bombs. Eventually, he stops Murdoch in the 6th round. Damon Nicholson was his prior opponent for Mbilli. Stops him in 4. Carlos Gongora, who was at one point the IBO champion at 168, was arguably, in my opinion, the toughest fight that Mbilli has had in his last 4 or 5 fights. Carlos Gongora almost knocked him out. Go check that fight out. He nearly stopped Mbilli. Mbilli would survive, stumbling, fumbling all over the ring, continue to throw sloppy punches, meanwhile gathering himself, and starts catching Gongora, starts hurting Gongora, and eventually makes it to the end and wins the unanimous decision against Carlos Gongora, remains undefeated. That's how you test the mettle. And we were just talking about it with Edgar Berlanga. He faced adversity. He overcame. He answered the demons. He faced his demons mid-fight, hurt, in pain, stumbling, and took the fight to Carlos Gongora, who's a solid fighter, and walked away with the unanimous decision win. Von Alexander, prior to that, another unanimous decision win. DeAndre Ware, he stopped in the 2nd round. Ronald Ellis, 2 fights prior to that, unanimous decision win there in 10. So to say the least, Christian Mbilli is starting to put together a really good resume, and he's in line to face the top opposition at the super middleweight division. With David Benavidez campaigning up at 175 against Vosdik, which is coming up mid-June, you have David Morrell, you have Caleb Plant, Jaime Munguia, you have Demetrius Andrade, who I feel should go back to 160, but if he stays at 168, that would be the biggest name for his resume if he could get that. But if he manages to get an Edgar Berlanga, which I know the Berlanga team will stay completely away from him, especially now that Eddie Hearn is there, he would never put Christian Mbilli and Edgar Berlanga in there. He's going to try to maximize the name by getting him into a big, high-profile fight. And even if he loses, which more likely he will with the top opposition, they'll be able to make some money out of it. That's the play for Edgar Berlanga, because they're going off of the hype. They're going off of the draw and the what if, than trying to actually build him up as a legit contender. Why? Because I'm not the only one, but you, who's on the other side listening, you know that you've seen exactly what I've seen. And more than likely, their promotional team, Berlanga's promotional team, has also seen the similar flaws that we're picking apart. And they know that the days are limited. So maximize the marketing, the marketability. Just let's see what we could get out of the Berlanga show for as long as it lasts, and then move on to the next, and they'll discard him. Canelo Alvarez would completely dismantle Berlanga. So would Munguia. So would a Ryder who just recently retired after the Munguia fight earlier this year. Christian Mbilli would have his way with Berlanga. Caleb Plant would pick Berlanga apart with his boxing. David Morrell. Interesting for me, because David Morrell, superb amateur record, has an up-and-coming record in the pros, but continues to look better and better every time. He's starting to look nearly unstoppable. Wait till the opposition level gets better. And he starts stepping in with more durable fighters that could handle Morrell's punch. So he's kind of at the similar stage where Berlanga's at. But as far as background's concerned, Morrell would definitely be the favorite by way of pedigree. Christian Mbilli is one of those dogs that could give anybody a hard time right now at 168. So that's who I would want to see Christian Mbilli with. Let's throw him in against David Morrell. There's Osles Iglesias, who a lot of people had not heard of until I mentioned him here a few episodes back, maybe about a year ago. Started talking about Osles Iglesias, who's another Cuban fighter who is now based out of and fights out of Germany. That's who I've been asking for to pin against David Morrell, which would be a super strategic, super tactical fight if those two were to step into the ring against one another. Osles Iglesias is the IBO champ. David Morrell has a version of the WBA, and so does Berlanga. So why not get Berlanga and David Morrell in the ring with one another, since they're both holding a standing in the WBA, for the WBA organization, trying to get in line for the Canelo sweepstakes. Demetrius Andrade is rated fairly high. I feel he needs to go back to 160, but if he stays at 168, you have a Diego Pacheco who's also in line. He's a towering inferno for these guys. Pacheco-Andrade would be a great fight. Pacheco and anybody would be a great fight. Eric Bazinian has also been looking really, really good, and he's high up there in the rankings, close to Osles Iglesias. So those are all names that we don't know yet, but Diego Pacheco we know of fairly well. David Morrell, Edgar Berlanga, Christian Mbilli is one of those names that you need to be aware of in case you haven't been. And that's one that you should really get behind on because he's got traction, he's got momentum on his side, and he's fighting that way. He's fighting like he wants it. He wants to smoke. He's answering the call, and he's a fun fighter to watch. So he looked really, really good. And let's keep an eye out to see who Christian Mbilli faces next. Hopefully, it's going to be a quick turnaround since this was a less than one round that the fight lasted. And with this win, the WBC had a Continental Americas title on the line between Heffron and Mbilli. So now Mbilli picks up this small version title with the WBC. We know for a fact that the WBC is not going to force anybody on Canelo because they couldn't do so with Benavidez and Canelo. So Canelo does what he wants, but Mbilli continues to position himself for the day comes, and it's going to come soon when Canelo vacates or retires. Who's going to take over the crown? These fighters are lining themselves up. With Benavidez moving up to 175, we may very well have a small playoff here for the WBC en route to Canelo sweepstakes. In my opinion, I think Canelo has maybe 2 or 3 fights left, and he's going to call it a day. And it's looking like Turkey, El Sheikh, who's putting together next week, there's going to be the big 5 versus 5 card between Frank Warren, Queensberry Promotions, and Eddie Hearn's Matchroom. They got Deontay Wilder, Zhilei Zhang, Amo Williams, and Hamza Shiraz, and Nick Ball fighting Ray Ford. To mention a few, we're going to do a full episode in the lead up to that event later this week. The reason I mentioned that 5 versus 5 is because it looks like Turki El Sheikh coming to the U.S. or coming stateside with his first event in August between Crawford and Madrimov, and it's going to be a loaded event with a bunch of stars taking, or a bunch of boxing fighters, good boxing superstars that are going to take part of that undercard and the co-main event. Tim Tszyu, Virgil Ortiz, to mention another one. He's looking at putting a Mexico versus USA type matchup as a 5v5, where they ended up releasing it on social media that if it happens, he would have Canelo against Terence Crawford, should Crawford be successful in August. And he would have a Jaime Munguia versus Caleb Plant, and what have you. So there was other people that he was putting. I think Venado Lopez was in that running too, and Pitbull Cruz was also mentioned. And so those plans are great. That's where I see Canelo's career starting to dwindle down or get to the later stages of close to retirement, when he starts having those mega fights, right? We just had that big fight with Charlo last year. He had this big important fight with Jaime Munguia. So now it's going to be another fan favorite or a mega event type fight. That would be the Crawford one. And then back to super middleweight business and so forth. And the career continues to dwindle until retirement hits. So with that said, with that in mind, these fighters are the important ones to be watching as super middleweight because they're lining themselves up and inching themselves towards title contention. Christian Mbilli is a live dog at 168, and it's going to be tough for whoever shares a ring with him. He's ranked really high. And right now, you would have a 50-50 fight between, that's how high I am on Mbilli. It would be a 50-50 fight for me if it was to be Munguia and Mbilli, just because of the styles that they have. It would be a 50-50 fight between Caleb Plant and Mbilli, giving the boxing to Caleb Plant, winning by points, but could he handle the power and the onslaught of Christian Mbilli? David Morrell, Mbilli, another 50-50 fight. David Benavidez out of the question at the moment. And so will Canelo Alvarez, of course, out of the question at the moment, because he's not going to fight Mbilli. So, yeah, he's that good. He's that good. So 27-0, 23 knockouts. The Frenchman, the Cameroonian, now Frenchman, fighting out of France, making noise, making waves. He's one to reckon with. He's one to that you should be familiar with. I would love to see him, if he doesn't get any of these names, I hope he goes for the IBO current champion, Osles Iglesias, or maybe even a Sergey Derevyanchenko, whom, if you haven't had a chance to check out the interview that I had with him, go to my YouTube channel and you could see that I caught him after the weigh-ins of Navarrete Baranchyk, and Derevyanchenko said he would either like to fight Munguia in a rematch or fight Christian Mbilli. That's somebody who's willing to take the test of Mbilli. Mbilli with easy work over Mark Heffron, ready to go. That would be a superb fight to watch, Derevyanchenko and Mbilli. So, in case you didn't get to check that out, keep an eye out for this fighter, and I'll leave you guys with that. I'll talk to you guys all in the next episode, and plenty of boxing to talk about this coming week. So I'll leave you guys with that. Thank you guys again for tuning in, for all the follows, the continued support, the continued love, the continued downloads. You guys continue to spread the word, and the show's growing little by little. But look, we're getting more invites to fights and more events, and let's see where else I could get my foot in. What other door I could knock on and have the door open, and let's see what other events I get to cover for you guys. So I thank you guys. I owe it all to you guys, every little bit of success that the show has had to date. And have yourselves a blessed and great night. Take care of yourselves.